Hey guys, how's it going? I'm Duke of Italy, and welcome back to another music review. And today we're covering something very special, as we always do. And this is quite possibly my last meme, band, discography, album review for a good while. As much as I enjoy it, I think it's time to move on to a little bit more important things for the moment. But believe me, I'm sending us out on a pretty good note here. Today we are reviewing the American boy band with the hit television series Big Time Rush. Yes. If you didn't like Big Time Rush as a kid, I don't know what you were doing. You were probably too old for it, maybe too young for it. There's a specific niche of kids that watch Nickelodeon and they just watch the show. I was kids. I was the kids that watched Big Time Rush. I'll admit it. I liked the show as a kid. I liked the music. Thought it was great. It was a good mix of rock and pop back then. But the main question is, do they hold up today? Well, Big Time Rush had 3 albums. They had their first album, BTR, their second album, Elevate, and after a 2-year break, they then made 24/7, and then the show got canceled, it ended, and they've pretty much been disbanded for the most part, except for a couple weeks ago, they did a live recording of Worldwide that was on Instagram, and it was a fun watch if you guys want to see it. An acoustic version of the song works pretty well. Anyway, so you guys know Big Time Rush. You got Carlos, Kendall, James, and Logan, the big 4, which I think is a good amount of people to have in a boy band because you don't have to try and look at all their names, and it's a small enough group where you can understand who each person is, and they can all have a different personality, and no one massively would outshine the others. They all really had a different personality, and they all kind of fit in their own way. I actually watched a few episodes of the show recently because I was on vacation and everyone was watching Big Time Rush. And I gotta admit, the show kind of holds up. There's especially one of the episodes where Carlos has the girlfriend that was paid off from Gustavo to sort of be his fake girlfriend. He goes to these ridiculous lengths to just keep her around. He buys her like shoes with like all his money. And then at the end of the show, she's like, "Hey, I've been faking it, but I actually like you for real." He's like, "Oh, okay, cool." And then she's like, "Yeah, I don't like corn dogs." And he's like, "It's not working." So the show's got some good points like that. So if you guys watch around the show, I'm sure you'll find some pretty good episodes. Of course, not all of them hit, but I'm digressing a little bit here. So the show, I mean, it's funny. But what about the music? That's what I'm reviewing here today. So first up, we have their 2010 release from Nick and Columbia Records, BTR. No, it's not Rock Records, unfortunately. I wish they would have made some little Easter egg on it. Already with the first track, Till I Forget About You, you get a bit of an issue that's actually really prevalent in the entire discography. It's that BTR can't do an intro track to an album. And I'm not saying Till I Forget About You is an appalling track. It's not. But it's much more low-key than something like the song Big Time Rush, which would have been a pretty much perfect opener for this whole thing. But instead, they choose to end the album with it. Anyway, so this opening track, it's pretty fun. I thought some of the synths were trying to be spacey, but they didn't quite work for me. The lyrics are obviously a little bit weaker. This is a Big Time Rush release. Like, you can't really expect that much from them. I like the main hook, but I think the rest of the chorus, just lyrically wise, doesn't make that much sense. I'm a big fan of the theme of the song. I thought it was a different angle that a lot of boy bands didn't really take. It was much more of a heartbreak song, but it wasn't exactly like, I'm so sad, this is terrible. It was a way of like getting out of it, but it wasn't like, I'm gonna replace you. It was just kind of moving on, which it's a good theme. I don't think this is a particularly strong song, but it's whatever. You start off the album on a pretty average note, so let's see where it goes from here. Next is actually their most popular song, Boyfriend. I gotta say, I'm not as big a fan of it as anyone else is. Yeah, it's a fun song, and the lyrics are okay, but I think there's really not enough of a build. I think all the haze coming out in the chorus are just kind of dumb. And I thought the hook where it just says boyfriend over and over again was kind of unnecessary. I've never been a big fan of just repetition for a hook. I also thought the bridge wasn't very strong, and the song really just rounded itself out to be a little bit on the boring side. Next track is City Is Ours, and at this point in the album, it's the best track. Of course, this is as poppy can get. It's very much like kind of smooth, like the background has like a very, very typical synth lead. Just the drum patterns aren't super crazy, and they actually used that instrumental section in the show a lot of times to show them being like smooth or cool or whatever. It's not my favorite, but it kind of works. The chorus is the best part of the song, I gotta say. They're a very chorus and hook led band here, but that just leaves too much room for areas like James on this song to mess up on the verse, where it sounds not exactly the best with the lyrical content, and I thought the bridge was pretty weak too. And starting off pretty early in the discography, the next song, Nothing Even Matters, is one of BTR's strongest tracks by a pretty significant margin. Now, first off, with the kind of almost trap-like drum beats and the specific synth leads, it reminds me of Ayaz or old Jason Derulo, just like a very smooth kind of vibe, I guess you could say. It's very R&B inspired, but it comes across as like super smooth, and the hook on the song is awesome. I think every band member gets a good amount of time to shine here. The synths, while they're subtle, they're pretty spacey in the background, which I thought was a nice touch. The chorus is just legendary here. Even if you don't know it, if you hear it for just one time, you're gonna like it. I like the bridge, and I actually thought the lyrics weren't half bad, so totally check this track out. Next is the iconic Worldwide. So I thought more than any song on their whole discography, James does the best here. Just the way his voice works with his pre-chorus is super good. The vibes are kind of dreamy, the lyrics are decent, the bridge with Carlos sounds pretty good, and the lyrics might just be whatever, and the chorus might be a little bit repetitive, and the song might not necessarily floor me, but other than that, I think it's a solid track, and especially on the acoustic version, where it's not kind of bogged down by the more poppy elements, it just still comes across as a very sweet song. Keeping on the train of good tracks, we got halfway there. In terms of flaws on this track, I thought the reverb on the voices didn't exactly match with the instrumentals. It sounded just a little off. I also thought the drum beat was pretty simple, but it had a way that was just pounding enough to keep the track going forward. I thought the instrumental break was pretty nice here. Of course, the synths are a little off sounding, and especially towards the end of the song, it loses its charm. But if they just trimmed off like 20 seconds here, you'd have a really strong track. Next song is Big Night. Now, this song debuted on the Halloween episode, which you'd expect there to be a lot of good backings behind this, maybe some sort of spooky vibes in the background, maybe it sound like Ghost. That's too high of a hopes for me. So I thought the lyrics were dumb, and the vocals were just reverbed and edited in a way that just super clashed with the more basic instrumental in the background. I guess you could say the song is catchy. It's a pretty decent hook that really gets in your ear, but I think other than it's weak. I liked the bridge, but that's pretty much the only part of the song that I liked. I also thought the ad-libs on this track were a little on the rougher side. Now, I actually remember the episode for this next track, Oh Yeah. I remember they were fighting about having an O song and a Yeah song, and then they put them together for some reason. I thought the intro was pretty dumb, but also was kind of sick for some reason. I wasn't sure why. I thought the verse sounded kind of Gaga-esque, and while it's not necessarily their style, it's an interesting deviation. I thought that the instrumental was going pretty strong, but when it hit the chorus, it just kind of switched back to what the group was already doing. They didn't really push any boundaries with the chorus here. The way the production was done, it really made me wanting for someone to try and sing a little bit lower, because they're almost always in the same register here. But I think that like someone could go like an octave lower or something like that. They're never really going crazy up there, so I think that like some more complex harmonies there would have worked better. I also like the bridge on the song, but that's about it. It's a pretty average track. The next track is called Count on You, featuring Jordan Sparks. If you don't know who she is, she was on No Air with Chris Brown, so that's where you probably recognize her from. I thought the spacey harmonies on the chorus were kind of nice. They're a little barbershop-esque, but the fact that they were singing 1, 2, 3, 4 to the 5, I thought it was pretty dumb and just kind of unnecessary. I felt like they could have done anything else with it. I can ignore it for the most part, though. While the lyrics were a little bit weak, I did think that the usage of every member was utilized pretty well here. Now we've got I Know You Know featuring Symphonique, and just at looking at the song, I looked up Symphonique and her discography. It's kind of odd. She has one EP from a couple years ago. Keep in mind, this album came out in 2010, but her EP came out 2 years ago. But other than that, she has 19 single releases, and that's it for her whole discography. No LPs. Her EP is only 20 minutes in length, which is about EP length. But still, I feel like there's just something missing about her, where she, and I can't believe I'm saying this, she doesn't have the gravitas to be in Big Time Rush. Anyways, enough about her. It had pretty generic BTR production here, but I liked the drum beat a lot. The chorus had more syncopated type lyrics, and I thought it was a nice touch. And to round out the song, we got Symphonique on a rapping part towards the end, which lasted probably no more than 10 seconds from as far as I can remember, and I just thought that it wasn't exactly the best placement. I feel like you could have added really anyone else and give them a good more, like at least a few more bars just to flesh out what they were saying. Anyway, that's enough about that track, because the last track on this album is the Big Time Rush. So people tend to love this song. I gotta admit, it's definitely not my favorite song on the album. Is it necessarily appalling? No. It's definitely in the same vein where you can ironically get down to it, but I think substance-wise, it's not really bringing anything to the table. Of course, it's a hype track, which is good. The album has just about as much hype as it needs to just keep it going. But I felt like that the placement of it here, rather than the beginning of the album, was not a good choice. I think the part, well, it's good for use in the show. It's not exactly appealing in a song. Also, the biggest issue with this whole song is I think it's too edgy for what Big Time Rush was going for. They try and reach a little more harsh tone with their voice. It's a little hard to explain necessarily, because I'm not an expert on vocal technique, but basically it sounds like they're trying to go harder than they can. And as we'll see later, Big Time Rush has a way of being a little more edgy, but I felt like this track was not exactly it. I thought the last 30 seconds were pretty good though. Anyways, that is the whole album. Definitely a lot of diversity in their track listing here. The couple features, every member got a good amount of usage here, but of course you definitely had a lot of weaker tracks. Very few tracks ever wowed me in any way. There are tracks like Big Night that definitely let me down. But, funnily enough, this is getting the highest score I've given on a sort of a meme album so far. This is getting a Wonder Bread, everybody. It's just alright. So, with Big Time Rush having the highest album rating so far, just take that as for what you will. But do they keep it up for their 2011 release Elevate? Let's see. Now, Big Time Rush continues their trend of having poor opening tracks here with Music Sounds Better With You. This is featuring some guy named Man, who I wasn't sure what he was going to bring to the table, but he apparently is a rapper. That's cool, I guess. But the whole thing with this song, and I might be biased here because I kind of grew up with the first album a lot more than the second or the third here, this track feels sterile. There's nothing that really hooks me. The hook just, it's not there for me. I thought the song felt way too clean, even for pop. I just thought that this whole thing felt pretty unremarkable, and Man's bars were pretty derivative as well. Next track is Show Me, and on this track I thought the instrumentals were pretty nice, but the vocals were way too overproduced again. I thought the pre-chorus was pretty dumb, and I thought that the hook was kind of reminiscent of Maroon 5 for some reason, and that's not a good sign. I thought the looped O's behind the chorus were pretty good, but other than that, the song, again, it's kind of spineless. Now we reach, in my opinion, one of the worst Big Time Rush tracks. It's called All Over Again. So it starts with piano, which is not a good sign for the album at this point. It's just not ready to have a more low-key track again. Like, if anything, it needs a more hype track. But instead, they just decided to do a nosedive into the ground with just this piano lead. And then you got James coming in on a beat switch, and he's way overproduced to this relatively organic sounding piano, and then this super pristine sounding James voice with like just an odd amount of reverb. It doesn't match. It's got my favorite element of all time here, claps instead of snares. Great. The song kind of felt like a whole bunch of half-baked ideas that were just kind of crammed together to try and fit into a song. And I thought the post-chorus on this track was appallingly bad. So as you guys can probably tell at this point, I'm not a fan of what has happened on this album so far. After this, we have the song No Idea, and the instrumentals were kind of cool here. They're pretty noisy in a way, but this is Big Time Rush, and while I wasn't exactly looking for super clean production in the first place, because believe me, I wasn't, I think that the noise elements don't really match with them either. I thought the song was boring and sappy. This song is also 5 minutes in length, and it's a clear example of the fact that BTR is not meant to make songs this long. BTR doesn't really have the ideas necessary to make a song longer than much past 3 minutes, which entirely on BTR, every song is around 3 minutes, but in their later discography, they might branch out to 5 minutes or 2.5, and just it's further weaker. And as much as I've been ragging on the fact that their song's been super low-key up until this point, they have this song called Cover Girl, and other than another song we'll get to later, this is the highlight of the album. It has an acoustic guitar lead, which it was cute. The harmonies from the boys are pretty good. Of course, this song is sappy and super cheesy, especially on Logan's lyrics. It's just over the moon levels of cheese. The song never quite reached a spacey point for me, which you guys know I like, but it felt very sweet. Was I absolutely blown away by this song? Well, at this point in the album, kind of, but objectively, it's nothing amazing. Now we get the song Love Me, Love Me, and just to show you guys how much I dislike this song, there were points where I thought I was listening to LMFAO on this. So just not great. The instrumentals were super electro-inspired, just noisy and gross. The lyrics on this track were some of the worst BTR ever made. This song is jarringly against everything else in the whole album, and I can honestly say every single production choice made on this track, I would disagree with. Now we reach If I Ruled the World. Now, this is the most energetic track on the album so far, but that doesn't really save from what was happening. Basically, the song is dumb. I genuinely believe that they wrote a chorus with dummy lyrics and then stuck the phrase "If I Ruled the World" on the end of it, and then just kind of threw it into a song and acted like that was okay. The Ayaz part where Ayaz comes in. Oh yeah, did I mention Ayaz is featured on the song? I don't know how they got him on here, but I'm kind of glad they did. He was okay, but I'm still not floored in any way. It's really not that hard to understand why the song isn't necessarily amazing. I'm just not necessarily wowed. The next track is called Invisible. It's another acoustic guitar-led track, and it just feels inconsistent at this point. Like, that really should have been a one-off song, but for some reason they bring it back. I thought this track was extremely whatever. I thought it was a little boring, but nevertheless, it's average. The next track is called Time of Our Life. A little bit boring, wasn't talking about much, but there was a bit of a spunky, kind of bubbly guitar intro here that I liked, but it just kind of comes across as an average track at this point. The next track is called Superstar, and you kind of get all you need to know about this song with the chorus. It feels very dated with the repetition. Basically, this song reminded me of That's What Makes You Beautiful without the explosiveness of One Direction. The next track is called You're Not Alone, and I gotta admit, it's a copy of Worldwide, but it doesn't have the punch. I thought it was nice and sweet, and the post-chorus was okay, but the song was just kind of whatever as a whole. Now we reach the track Elevate, the title track, which, again, should have been the intro, but it's not a good song. The beat is kind of EDM inspired, which is super bizarre for a BTR track. The synths are buzzy and weird. The song strays from their more hype material. The song feels noisy in an overly complicated way. It's kind of like they dumped all their eggs into this one basket, but then they just kept piling more and more on top of it, and then it just felt bloated and just kind of off. Now we reach the song Windows Down, which, while before they ended their album with BTR, and you'd think they'd end it with Elevate, I gotta admit, I came into the song with some low expectations. The album was very disappointing thus far. Until I started playing the song, and I heard the guitar intro from Song 2 by Blur. So in my humble opinion, other than the track Nothing Even Matters, this is BTR's best song. Like, I was sitting in my chair listening to this thing, and it came on, and I seriously had to look up and wonder what I was listening to. I'm like, is this the same album? It feels so jarring coming across this really, really interesting track when the rest of the album is not nearly as good. I felt genuinely cheated when this track came on, knowing that they could make something this good. First off, whatever I talked about before about there being nothing hype about this album, you can kind of cast it all away right now, because this song brings all of it. I think the song is varied just enough where you can tell the difference between the verse, the pre-chorus, and then the chorus, as well as the hook just in general. The chiptune synths on the pre-chorus just sort of arpeggiate in a way that's just pulsating, and it's rad, really. And other than the fact that this song, just at face value, is hype, it's fun, it's a fun sample, it's got a lot going for it. It's also a statement. BTR's trying to make a statement here. I can't believe it. So the reason they made this track, especially with the Song 2 sample, harkens back to 90s Britpop scene, where you had the war between Oasis and Blur in England, basically dominating their rock scene. You had the boy bands that came in the 2000s and the early 90s. And then this sample was used basically as a giant middle finger to British boy bands. I can't believe it. This is like Twitter drama, but put in a song, but better, because they're sampling Blur in a way that just shows we're cooler than you. And to get the full enjoyment of the song, I like to ignore the rest of the album. I just like to think, yeah, BTR's back, they're bringing the hype, and just ignore the rest of the album, because this is the track that shows that they're back. But unfortunately, I can't ignore the rest of the album. So, full of poor lyrical choices and odd production choices as well, and with a few tracks that are very much trying to carry the album, you get a weaker release than the self-titled Big Time Rush album. That's why I'm feeling a sneed. Next album. 2 years later, we reach the album 24/7, which is their shortest release at 32 minutes. There's also a deluxe edition on Spotify, which none of the tracks say that it's for a deluxe edition. They're just kind of extra tracks, just kind of stapled on the end. But I like listening to the album much more without them. So this album suffers from the same issues that the other Big Time Rush releases were having. Not exactly the strongest lyrical choices, some production choices that are iffy here and there, but it is a little bit more modern, so they did learn from their mistakes and elevate. We start off with the title track 24/7. For once, we're starting off with the title track, and unfortunately, this is the one time I wouldn't want to start off with it. I gotta lie, the percussion on this track is a little bit dizzying. It's not fun. The fuzzy guitar sounds are pretty good, but after a while, it reaches sort of a blah moment. Despite the pre-chorus, this whole track feels spineless, and eventually it just turned into muzak, just elevator music. Not necessarily awful, but not a great start. Next track is called Like Nobody's Around, and it's just carrying the same issues as before. It's just kind of spineless and boring. I thought James, when he was on the bridge, it sounded pretty nice, and there's some synth leads that sounded pretty good, but just kind of boring and just generally an average track. Next track is called Get Up. And at this point in the album, I was being pretty disappointed. The energy did not change once, and I genuinely thought I was in for the worst Big Time Rush release so far. I thought the lyrics on this track were flat and a little bit pointless, honestly. I thought the chorus had a little bit of punch, but that's all there was to this track. It sounded like there was some reverse piano at points, which was a cool production choice, but you can't carry a song with that. I thought in this track the biggest issue was that nothing was quite given time to marinate and all the builds were just kind of glossed over. I liked the synth, it sounded weird, but there was just something to it that I liked. The next track is called Song For You featuring Carmen. I thought this track sort of almost was pretty good, but it just fell into the last problems as before. I mean, they have a feature this time to try and help them out, but again, it's kind of spineless. The next track is called Run Wild. It has these synths arpeggios that I thought were unintentionally hypnotic. I don't think Big Time Rush was going for that. I thought it was way too clean, especially when the verse went into the pre-chorus and the chorus, that the cuts were just super surgical. So you could easily tell when it goes from here to there. And it's almost like he just chunked a part of a different song and just put it in and then did it again for the chorus. And then it all switched back to the verse after the chorus. Nearing the end of the track, I zoned out for like a good 30 seconds, then I zoned back in, and I genuinely thought that not a single thing changed. Next track is called Crazy For You. The instrumentals on this track were not appealing. I would describe it as electro reggae, but why would you not be a little more complex with electro? Why would you ever try and copy reggae? Some of the most simple playing ever. I thought Kendall's tone was pretty weird here. There's a point when they say, feels like a broken record. Yeah, BTR, you're kind of sounding like you're just repeating the same elements over and over here. It's got the same lyrical themes as their other songs. This track really brings nothing to the table. Next track is called Picture This, and I like this song. It came back with a much more confident edge that the album was severely missing. So other than the fact that on the pre-chorus I was asking for a little bit more bite, I thought that the track was doing pretty well for itself in terms of energy. The switch into the second verse was pretty good too, and on the last pre-chorus I thought James really just carried it. Unfortunately, the next track is called Confetti Falling, their longest track and one of the weakest on the album. It's a really long track, and it really just suffers from the fact that everything on it was done before and it was done better. So that's really all you gotta know about it. The next track is called Amazing. And I think the greatest strength on this track is that the lyrical themes, while they're about loving someone and not being super out of the park here, I like the idea that it's saying that, oh, you don't need to wear makeup, you can just put your hair up, wear my sweatshirt, it's all cool. It's much cuter like that. Of course, I'm not going to mention that Jacob Sartorius totally tried copying the song a few years later in a much worse way with a super nasally tone. But I think the track was kind of working for itself on 24/7 here. The only issue on this track really was that it dragged just a little bit, but I think it was one of the best parts so far. The next track is called We Are, and I gotta admit, this song was it's a sad song. It's very much about how Big Time Rush, they were done after this album. It was about how nothing else was going to be done, the show was about to end, And it got me kind of emotional, just chilling here, just listening to BTR. I didn't expect BTR to be pulling at my heartstrings. Of course, I'm an exhausted person all the time, so it's pretty easy to do that with some songs, but didn't think BTR would be doing that today. So even though the ending was dragged out for a minute or so, I thought that the piano leads were great and the lyrical themes were pretty good. Of course, the tone was hurt with the drag out of the song, but as much as I wanted to rag on the song, I really couldn't. I thought it was just special enough to just be like, oh, it's really sweet. And it gave me a super nostalgic feel, really, just listening to it. And of course, that would have never happened in 2011. I would have been like, oh, it's just a song about being like motivated or whatever. But now it's like, wow, it's your childhood is really over. So what do I think of this album as a whole? I thought it was better than Elevate by a small margin, but it didn't go far enough to quite reach BTR. I'd say I give this about a medium sneed. While there are improvements over Elevate, the lack of tonal change drags the album much farther than it should have been gone. So with their whole discography, I think you could pull about enough tracks to get maybe like 7 or 8 songs that are all pretty solid that you could probably make a good set out of. Maybe they do like a show at some point. Of course, they'd have to have the Big Time Rush theme song at some point, but they had enough tracks so that I could generally appreciate what they were trying to do here. It's not that they didn't have enough material. So as a whole, I would give their discography a sneed. It's not breaking enough boundaries, and the production choices all over are just kind of weak, and it's pop. And I kind of infamously have a hard time accepting pop for what it is, but there were definitely some points that I liked a lot. Probably like 2 or 3 tracks of theirs I thought were super, super strong, that if were played in a show, I'd totally get down to them. I genuinely thought if you just boosted the bass on Windows Down and you played that at like a high school party or a club or something like that, I'd probably get down to it. Of course, everyone else would be like, is this Big Time Rush? And everyone else would be like, I guess it is. It's probably one of their few songs that I couldn't ironically get down to, but I would legitimately get down to. I actually listened to it not that long ago today, and I'm still gonna listen to it. So that's the discography. If you guys enjoyed this video, please like and subscribe, and consider sharing me with some friends. I'd love for people to think about my perspective on Big Time Rush, because it's so important at this day and age. Anyway, I hope you guys are doing well, and I hope you guys remember, it's the only life you got, so you gotta live it big time. Have a good day.